The NFL Combine is underway in Indianapolis. Had a great chat with Pro Football Focus analyst Max Chadwick here on this special edition of Locked On Cougars, looking at potential Cougars in the pros from this year's draft class, and also a little bit on what's going on with the college football playoff and the expansion of said playoff, as well as BYU's place in the Big 12.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Here with Max Chadwick from Pro Football Focus. Does a great job covering all things football, whether it's college and also the NFL draft. Max, welcome back to the Locked On Cougars podcast, sir.
Of course, man. Thanks so much for having me on again.
Absolutely. So let's start here. The NFL draft is upcoming. We have the combine coming, pro days, all that stuff coming. And BYU's headliner is going to be Kingsley Suamataia, obviously, a guy that has been projected as high as the first round in certain mock drafts. Give me your overall sense before we kind of dive into the particulars of what Kingsley has done so far in this draft process in your mind and how he looks.
Yeah, obviously Kingsley has been a guy that people have been super high on. He performed pretty well at the Senior Bowl. He's been a really good pass blocker, I think, each of his last two seasons. He kind of took a little bit of a step back as a run blocker this past year. But I remember, last time I went on your show was after I interviewed Kingsley, and we talked about how great of a kid he is. And I think he's going to do really well in the interview process, especially at the NFL Combine this upcoming week. And the other reason that he might move up boards after this upcoming NFL Combine is he is an absolute freak of nature, man. He is going to be testing out of this world. I think he will be one of the biggest winners probably of the NFL Combine. I remember he was like number 2 or 3, I think, on Bruce Feldman's Freaks list, who is one of the best reporters in college football. He puts out a list about the 100 or so freakiest athletes in college football from all the intel he's gained, and Kingsley was one of the highest ranked ones. And I think he said he ran about over 22 miles per hour on the GPS at one point, which is that's like the fastest ball carriers in the NFL hit that mark. So, I think Kingsley Suamataia will have a phenomenal NFL Combine. Right now, he's probably more of a second-round pick, in my opinion. But, hey, man, if he really kills at the Combine, maybe he could push for late first round. I probably wouldn't take him in that range. But if he's as freaky as we think he could be, there are some NFL teams that might fall in love with him.
Yeah, see, that's the conversation I've had with multiple people, both on this podcast and just in real life. They talk about all the time, like, well, why wouldn't Kingsley get this and why wouldn't he get that? And I always tell them, here's the thing. You're drafted in professional sports more on potential than you are on production. They're looking at looking down the road and saying, okay, how good can this athlete be? And you mentioned Kingsley, one of the top freaks on that freaks list that Feldman puts out, and he does a great job, as you mentioned, with that. I wanted to ask you. He went to the Senior Bowl, and at BYU, he was listed at 6'6" on the roster. He checked in at 6'4" and change at the Senior Bowl, which is considered, I think, akin to the Combine in terms of the measurements that people will pay attention to. How concerning is that he's not 6'5" or taller as an offensive tackle prospect?
Yeah, it does hurt him a little bit. Obviously, you want your tackles to be around 6'6", and he's a guy like his cousin Penei Sewell. He's a guy that checked in shorter than we might thought, so that might hurt him a little bit. But I do think he's got enough length that he could survive at offensive tackle in the NFL, and at least deserves a shot at offensive tackle in the NFL. I don't think he needs to be kicked inside to guard immediately or anything like that. So, and again, I think his athleticism will make up for the fact of any shortcomings he might have, pun not intended there. But yeah, I think Kingsley is a guy that, the length is definitely a question with him. But he performed really well as a pass blocker in each of the last 2 years. Just got to get a little bit better in the run game, but he's a freaky athlete, man. So yeah, he's going to be drafted. He's a guy that's really going to be drafted on potential by a lot of NFL teams.
Now, you said a little bit earlier that you would probably take him in the second round range right now. What makes you push him down your list a little bit? What are the main reasons?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest reasons, and this has nothing to do with him, is that the offensive tackle class in 2024 is stupid loaded. I mean, there are so many good. I think you look at PFF's big board right now, you can find out PFF.com. The great Trevor Sycamore puts that together. I think he's the best draft analyst in the business that we have. But I think he had 8 first-round offensive tackles, like 8 guys in the top 32. So he's a little bit of a victim of being in such a loaded class that, if he was in a weaker class, say, he might get pushed up the board because obviously offensive tackles is a position that teams always covet early in the NFL draft. He's kind of behind a lot of guys right now. It's one of the best offensive tackle classes I can remember, honestly. So that hurts him. And then also, I would also say he kind of had a down year this past year. He actually improved as a pass blocker, going from an 80.9 pass blocking grade in 2022 to 83.4 this past season. But his run blocking grade went from a 74.2 in 2022 to 52.9 this past season. I think you started to see a little bit of the competition jump hurt him a little bit in that aspect. So I think the run blocking will kind of push him down boards a little bit. I still love him as a pass blocker. I still love his athleticism. I still love all the potential he has. But I think the year he just had in 2023, I'm not sure he's going to be as highly coveted as he once was entering the season, honestly. So still a top 50 pick probably in the NFL draft. I don't think he's the first round prospect that he once was, honestly.
Now, this is more of a big picture thing. When it comes to prospects in the NFL draft, we all know that these NFL teams are going to do like a deep dive on these guys. They're going to talk to family members, coaches, frankly, a neighbor or two, it feels like, that grew up down the road from them 5 years ago. It's insane how deep they will dive into these guys' backgrounds. How much can that hurt or help a guy if you pass with flying colors on that front, or if you have maybe some checkered past?
Yeah, it definitely will hurt. It definitely is a huge thing, honestly. And I think, most underrated part of the whole combine process is the interview process. Now, it's underrated because we as fans cannot be in the room with those guys talking to the NFL team, so we don't know how they perform. Whereas the on-field drills, you know exactly how a guy performs in there. So I think Kingsley, just based off the conversation I had with him, I think he's going to be great in the interview process. He really was a lively guy, really fun guy to be around. Funny guy. And also you could tell he lives for this, man. I remember one of the quotes I think he told me was saying, hey, when I step on that field, like it's all business to me because I'm going out there, I'm playing for my family. I'm playing for them. I'm playing because I want to support them and get to the NFL. And that's something that the NFL teams are going to love. So they want to see that fire. And I personally saw that fire in Kingsley's eyes when I interviewed him. He's a big family-oriented guy. So I think that's going to be another plus for NFL teams. I know he's very close to his family. Penei Sewell, I mentioned before, is his cousin who's mentored him, and I'm sure NFL teams will love that. Penei Sewell was the best tackle in the NFL this past season, honestly, and probably would be the tackle I start my franchise with if I could pick any of them. So that, I think, helps him as well. I think Kingsley is going to pass the interview process with flying colors. I don't think there's anything in his past that should come up, honestly. And I think NFL teams are just going to love his personality. They're going to love how family-oriented he is. And they're going to trust him, honestly. They're going to put a lot of trust into him, which is why I think that part of the process for him in the pre-draft process, I think that won't be an issue at all. So if he really does well in the interview process and he really does well in the athletic testing, which I think he will do in both, he could push his stock up a lot higher than what it is right now.
Now, narrowing back in on him, just one other question I've got is, you mentioned the fact he's got that fire, and I think anybody who talks to Kingsley knows that this is a kid that football is his life. It's right. what he wants to do. Now, with regards to his future with football, when it becomes a professional thing, some guys embrace it, and it absolutely is what they've always wanted to do, and they embrace all that comes with being a professional athlete and being a part of an NFL franchise. In your opinion, did you kind of sense that from Kingsley, that he is excited to have this be his sole focus, not having to worry about school or other things, just make football his life?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely what I came away with that conversation was that, again, like he said, I go out there and there's no jokes. Like I know, hey, when I make sure to look in the opposing defensive lineman's eyes every rep. Because I know, hey, it's me versus you. Like he fired me up, honestly, when I talked to him. I'm sure he's going to fire a lot of coaches up when he talks to them in the interview process at the combine and throughout this whole pre-draft process. So, I think he's a guy that has been working at this his entire life. He's been mentored by great football players in his family, honestly. I think this is something that he's just been trained to do. He was a former 5-star recruit coming out of high school, went to Oregon for a year, then transferred to BYU. Like he's been kind of built for this, honestly. So, I think this is something he's really looking forward to. And I'm sure once he gets to the NFL level, he is going to be laser focused, honestly, at being the best player he possibly can be.
Now, last year, Blake Freeland set the NFL Combine on fire with his freaky athleticism. Do you think that Kingsley can match those type of numbers?
Oh, that'd be tough. I know Blake broke some records at the combine last year. He was unbelievable. Kingsley, I remember when I talked to him about Blake. He's like, yeah, man, Blake's a freak. Like he's like, I knew he was like a freaky athlete, but even some of the numbers he was putting up, I was like, oh my God, like I did not know he was capable of that. But yeah, I think Kingsley will, man. I mean, honestly, if you ask me out of any tackle in this year's draft, who is going to have the best combine? My answer probably would be Kingsley Suamataia, just because of how freaky of an athlete he is. And there are other guys who obviously will also test really well. I think guys like Olu Fashanu will probably test pretty well. I think Amarius Mims from Georgia will also test really freaky. But I think Kingsley, man, just based off the numbers we got from Bruce Feldman's Freaks List and just based off watching his tape, you could see it as a really, really good athlete out there. And I think he will be one of the biggest winners at the offensive tackle position, if not the biggest winner at the combine next week.
Talking here with Max Chadwick from Pro Football Focus. And Max, I wanted to ask you about some of the other draft hopefuls from BYU. Let's start off with Kedon Slovis. He's a guy who's been invited to the combine. There were conversations last year that he could have come out for the NFL draft in 2023. And Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl said that he would have had a draftable grade on him at that point. Where does his stock stand right now ahead of the combine, and what do you expect from a guy like Kedon?
Yeah, I think Kedon Slovis is a guy I like. Kedon, he's always a guy that I liked a lot at USC. I even thought he was a future NFL quarterback based off what he showed at USC. Then he obviously got hurt. Goes to Pitt, wasn't really as good as Pitt. Transferred to BYU this year. Honestly, he had a 70.6 grade this past season for BYU. I don't know if he's going to get drafted. Honestly, he's probably going to be one of the top undrafted free agent quarterbacks. So I could see him, obviously making a training camp roster, playing in the preseason. Maybe he could, fight his way and make a final roster. But yeah, maybe he's a guy that honestly, with so many football leagues popping up nowadays, like the UFL and all that, like he could be a guy that goes there and tries to build his stock up through there. So I don't know if Kedon is a guy that I think will get drafted. He could do well in the interview process. I think that's kind of the big key for quarterbacks in this whole combine week is the interview process more than the on-field drills or anything else. Because I don't really think the athleticism stuff matters to teams that much with quarterbacks. But yeah, I think Kedon is a guy that it's going to be tough. He's right on the border of getting drafted, in my opinion. So maybe he sneaks into that 7th round. But as of right now, I think he's probably an undrafted free agent.
Now, in my radio job, my day job, we had Steve Young on in the lead up to the Super Bowl. And obviously the conversation, him being a 49ers legend, was a lot about why Brock Purdy has succeeded with the 49ers. And Steve pointed out something that I think gets overlooked with regards to quarterbacks. And he talked about the fact that in the draft process, it's hard to get what do you call it? He called it the processing ability of a quarterback to be able to understand things. And he said that Brock Purdy, he's one of the best processors of information that there is in the league. That's what allows him to succeed at the level he's succeeded at so far. Can you kind of speak to that as a guy who evaluates talent? And is there a way to find out more information about how well guys process information, especially when it comes to a quarterback?
Yeah, I think that's something that really is important. That's something that Justin Fields struggled with at Ohio State, and he struggled with in the NFL too. Like that's something that it really is a key trait that it's not as easily noticed as, say, arm strength or rushing ability or something like that. Like that is like you could pretty much tell almost immediately when a guy has that processing ability. Something that you have to like kind of a keener eye for that. Kedon's played a lot of football, and I think that helps him. I think he is a good processor. Obviously, he's played. He's played for 5 years now, honestly, and like been a starter for almost 5 years. So yeah, he's got a good processing ability. He gets the ball up pretty quickly. So yeah, I think that is something that's going to help to his advantage. I think Kedon's a very accurate quarterback too. But I just don't know if the tools are NFL level. But yeah, I think Kedon. Listen, I'm not going to call him the next Brock Purdy or anything like that, but I do think he could maybe surprise some teams in training camp and make an active roster at the end of the training camp period ends. So. Yeah, like I said, I don't think he's going to get drafted as of right now. Maybe if he has a really good combine, that would change. But just as of right now, I think Kedon Slovis is more of a guy that I would take a flyer on as an undrafted free agent more than anything else.
I know that Kedon absolutely loved his time playing alongside Isaac Rex, and Rex is obviously coming up here in the NFL draft. He's one of your classic BYU guys who served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, so he's an older prospect. He has played a lot of football in his career. He did have that horrific ankle injury at the tail end of the 2022 season against USC. Give me your overall sense of where Isaac Rex stands right now in that tight end class.
Yeah, I think I think the injury is a big thing, and I like Isaac. He actually his brother would DM me on Twitter a lot, just asking about Isaac and like how he can get better. And I was like, listen, man, I cover college football. I'm not going to try to tell this guy who's a future NFL player like how he can get better. I just sent him a bunch of numbers and stuff, but yeah, super cool family. Really, the whole BYU team is just. I've had nothing but great experiences talking to anyone affiliated with BYU, honestly. So, but Isaac. The one thing I will say with Isaac that does concern me is that he's kind of been, his grades have taken a dip almost every single year of his career. His highest grade was in 2020 at a 70.3, and then the next year 64.3, 63.7 next year, and then 61.5 this past season. I think the injuries have kind of hurt him a little bit, and he looked like a great receiver in 2020, and then that's kind of just taken a downturn since then. He wasn't really as good of a run blocker this year. Again, I think this is more of a guy that I would take a flyer on as an undrafted free agent more than anything else. But I do think that there's something there with him. I don't know if an NFL team is going to want to take him on day 3, especially with kind of how he's been on the kind of the downturn of his career. Usually you want to see guys consistently get better throughout their career. Rex has kind of been going the opposite path of that. So I don't think he'll get drafted, but he should also be another guy like Kedon Slovis who, is one of the top undrafted free agents available.
Now, with the transformation of the tight end in the NFL these days, you all look at the Travis Kelce's of the world, you look at the George Kittles, you look at these top-end tight ends, they've got elite receiving skills. Has a receiving tight end there and the receiving ability, has it overshadowed their blocking ability, or does that still very much matter in this day and age?
It matters. It doesn't matter as much as it used to, but it does matter. Now, of course, if you're a guy like Travis Kelce, who is maybe the greatest receiving threat the tight end position has ever seen, then you can live with being a below average blocker, which is what he is. But guys like George Kittle, George Kittle is one of the best blockers in the NFL. People forget that Rob Gronkowski, when he was playing, was one of the best blocking tight ends that we've seen too. So it does matter as well. But a guy like Isaac Rex, he's a solid blocker. Doesn't really mess up too many times. Doesn't make any like unbelievable blocks either. But he's a guy that I think is pretty technically sound as a blocker, which I think will help him. And he's also really good after the catch too. But I just think, again, like I said before, with everything he's done in his career and how he's kind of been, going on the downward slope, I just think that's probably what's going to scare teams off of spending a day 3 pick on him.
Last guy I wanted to ask you about in terms of NFL draft prospects is Max Tooley. Now, Max is a guy who kind of moved around multiple positions during his career at BYU. Similar to Isaac, he's an older prospect, but what have you seen from Max? What gives him hope of potentially landing with an NFL team?
Yeah, I think Max Tooley is a guy that, he's a little bit of a bigger, he's got decent size for position at linebacker at 6'2", 225, but probably has to put on a little bit of weight at the next level. He kind of really did struggle as a run defender this past season, and like kind of Isaac Rex, kind of at his worst season yet in his final year, which is something that NFL teams are not going to love just by grading standpoint. At least he had a 45.1 grade this year, 72.1 in 2021. But yeah, I just think, Tulley struggled this year. I don't think he'll get drafted again. But you should get a look in it on a training camp roster right now. But I just think the struggles in run defense the team saw this year, and honestly, him having his worst year of his entire career, that's probably what's gonna scare teams off of spending a pick on him.
Now, you mentioned it earlier, the UFL, obviously the unification of the XFL and the USFL together. Is that a route that you think more and more guys who may be on the fringe of the NFL will utilize as a way to maybe, as you mentioned, trend upwards and ultimately land in the NFL? Where do you see that fitting in this football universe?
Yeah, I don't think anyone's going to turn down the NFL for the UFL. I think everyone's going to rather be a bench warmer. Like they'd rather be the 53rd guy or 54th guy in the roster than a star player for a UFL team, honestly. Just by the money. Honestly, I think that's the big thing. I think the NFL, no matter, even if you're the last guy in the roster, you're still going to be making more money probably than most, if not all, UFL players. So, but it is an avenue. It is an avenue, and it adds another avenue for more football players, which is good. So guys that, aren't going to make a final roster, instead of sitting out an entire season, all they do is work out, they can still play football and play for another team and maybe make their name through that. And we've seen guys before in the XFL and other leagues make their names through that, like Turpin, the Cowboys returner, won the MVP of those leagues. And obviously now he's with the Cowboys, and now he's, their top returner, one of the top returners in the NFL, and also like a decent receiver for the Cowboys as well. Is going to be another avenue. Now, again, like I said, I don't think anyone's going to turn down the NFL for that league, at least not for a very long time. But I do think it's good that, you're getting more guys that maybe weren't good enough for the NFL initially. Now they get a chance to prove that hey, I am getting better in this league. Whereas if you weren't good enough in the NFL for the first place, it's really hard to break into the NFL when you don't have any tape to show for it. So, once you're done with college and you're not signed to an NFL team, it's hard for you to just say, hey, I'm working out a lot and I can make a roster that way. So it's great that the UFL is there. There's still the CFL as well, and there's still the Arena Football League. It's just more avenues for guys, which I honestly think is a great thing.
And I agree with you on that. Talking with Max Chadwick here. And Max, I also wanted to get some thoughts from you just on BYU in the 2023 season, them in the Big 12. The Cougars, they were sitting at 5-2 at one point. All of us here in Salt Lake City and Utah were thinking, okay, gotta get one more win to get the bowl eligible. They probably would have exceeded expectations at that point. And then they had a 5-game slide to end the season. So give me your overall sense of how 2023 went for the BYU football program.
Yeah, obviously it's definitely a learning curve going from a Group of 5 schedule to the Big 12, and we expected that. It sucked for them that they just missed out on a bowl game. I know that would have been huge for that program, but yeah, you look at their roster. I think they struggled in a lot of areas last year, honestly, and they had injuries too that really hurt them. But yeah, I think again, to expect BYU to come in and win 9-10 games consistently like they did before in the Big 12 was not really realistic. This is kind of like a rebuilding program right now. They're trying to get up to the Power 5 level, which I think they are going to eventually do. It just might take some time to ultimately get to that level.
Now, in terms of recruiting, they did have the highest ranked recruiting class of the Kalani Sitake era. In your mind, and this is all going on like 24/7 Sports, their class rankings. Those are an inexact science. But what level do you believe BYU needs to recruit at in terms of, if you mentioned they want to get to a Power 5/Big 12 level, what level of recruiting do they need to be at to get to that?
Yeah, they need to recruit at a high level, honestly. And I think that's something that they're kind of learning, is that we got to be performing at a high level in order to get or recruit at a high level in order to get these guys in. So yeah, they brought in their, like I said, their best class yet. I think that's once you become a Power 5 school, it's easier to convince guys to come to your school and to ultimately be a Power 5 program that's worthy of being a Power 5 program. So I think BYU, they had a top 50 class this past season. They got a couple 4-stars coming in. That's really good. And I think another thing BYU has got to continue doing, and they've done it already, is just attack the transfer portal. Utilize it as much as possible. If you're not utilizing the transfer portal, you're honestly falling behind in college football. And you look at a school like Clemson, really is not really utilized too much. They're falling behind the elite ways that they used to be. It really is kind of like free agency. So if you're BYU, you should be attacking the transfer portal just as hard, if not harder, than high school recruiting, because you're not going to convince, many top high school recruits to maybe go to BYU, but you might convince some top players that, don't really have another avenue right now after transferring from school. They're going to look at BYU and say, okay, yeah, maybe I can play at the Power 5 level and build my stock up again through that way. So attack the transfer portal, attack high school recruiting. That's kind of the way to win in college football nowadays. And I think BYU is starting to realize that.
I know that you do a lot of college football coverage. How much has NIL transformed this sport?
Oh, it's changed it completely. I don't think I've said it before. I don't think there's ever been a harder time to be a college football coach than it is right now, because players can transfer freely now without having to sit out a year. So basically has become the wild, wild west in terms of that. And then also the NIL, that's another kind of headache for college football coaches they got to handle. I'm not here saying I think NIL shouldn't be there. I think absolutely the players deserve to make money off their own name and take advantage of that. But I do think some measures need to be taken in place, because right now it is kind of gotten a little too crazy in college football right now. And it's driving away a lot of great coaches. And Nick Saban mainly retired because of the way college football is going right now. I think NIL has changed everything in college football and has made it kind of more semi-pro, which I know some college football fans hate, but I think it's better than what we had before. To answer your question, NIL and the transfer portal, it really has revolutionized college football.
Two other questions I got for you real quick, just on the college football front. How big is the additions that the Big 12 made to Utah, the Arizona schools, and Colorado coming in this year, that 16-team league? How competitive do you expect the Big 12 to be?
Oh, extremely competitive. I think it's a wide open conference. In fact, I think it's probably the most wide open conference in college football next year. I think the ACC is also pretty wide open, but you look at the Big 12. I mean, I didn't have a single Big 12 school in my top 10, but then I had Utah number 11. I had Arizona number 14. I had Oklahoma State in my top 25. I had Kansas in my top 25. I had Kansas State in my top 25. It's a wide open conference next year. And now you're guaranteed to get at least one Big 12 school in the college football playoff. I'm really excited to see how the Big 12, how wide open the Big 12 is, and who ultimately comes out of the Big 12 and secures and guarantees himself one of those probably top 4 seeds, honestly, in the college football playoff. So, yeah, it's a wide open conference next year. I could see a number of schools winning it. Right now, I would probably say Utah is my pick to win it, which I know BYU fans probably won't love hearing. But, yeah, I think it's still a wide open conference, and I can see a ton of schools, honestly, coming out of it right now.
Now, just to follow up on that, I have another question I'll get to here in a moment, but just to follow up on that, you talk about the fact that you don't have anybody in the top 10 right now. Do you think it's going to take some time for a dominant force in the Big 12 to really become a mainstay in the top 10 because of that competitiveness?
Yeah, I think so. I'm, you look at the state of the Big 12 right now and the state of these programs, there really isn't a program that I think Utah is always going to be really good as long as Kyle Whittingham and that coaching staff are there. They have a terrific coaching staff that develops talent at a super high level. I don't really know if there's too many other programs that I'm buying a ton of stock in right now. Honestly, I would have said Arizona, but Jed Fish left to go to Washington. So yeah, I think it's just a really sound conference right now. And I just think that there maybe is not a team that really is a national title contender, but it's still a wide open conference that, should be a lot of fun keeping track of. And I think it'll be, a ton of teams jostling for that number 1 spot, honestly, when it's all said and done.
Now, you talked about the playoff a little bit earlier. Now, we just got the official word that's the 5+7 model is going to be in effect for these 2 years. But we're already hearing the rumors, 14-team playoff, 16-team playoff. Where's the future of this going, Max?
It's expanding. It's definitely going to expand. I think it will expand. I think the fact that we're even talking about this already, even before even getting one season in of the 12-team, it shows is going to expand. I think the 14-team playoff will be here. I know the earliest it can come is 2026. I wouldn't be surprised if they actually do it for 2026. So we might only get 2 years of a 12-team playoff before going to a 14-team playoff. And I think the biggest reason for that is not because of money, which is why they expanded it in the first place. It's really because of access. I think the Big Ten and SEC want more automatic bids because those two conferences are kind of becoming the super conferences in college football and kind of leaving almost everyone else behind. They probably want more automatic bids. They don't want to be treated the same as the Big 12 and ACC. They probably want to say, hey, we want to get 4 automatic bids to the playoff. And if you do that, obviously you have to put more playoff teams in to make up for it. So yeah, I think that's the reason why they're expanding. I don't know if I love it right now, but I do think it's going to happen sooner rather than later. And I think we will be getting a 14-team playoff and probably eventually a 16-team playoff too.
And that's the other thing about this. Do you really think that the Big Ten and the SEC will be able to pull enough rank and enough clout in a way to guarantee themselves extra slots, whereas the Big 12 and the ACC and whoever else is relegated to maybe having 1, maybe 2 at the most?
Yeah, I think they can, and I think they will. I think there has been talks, and I don't know about how realistic there are, but there has been talks with the Big Ten and SEC kind of branching off and doing their own thing from the college football playoff and all that, and determining their own champion. That is a nightmare scenario, I think, for the college football playoff. I for all the committee members right now. So I don't think that's how realistic that is. I think that's kind of maybe the Big Ten and SEC are a little bit bluffing when they say that. I don't think they want to do that either. But I think if they don't get their way and they don't say, hey, if you don't treat us like the, super conferences that we are, then we will, branch off. Again, I don't know how realistic that will be, but I do think they're going to play that card if it does come to that. But I don't think it will come to that. I think they will expand, and I think they will guarantee the Big Ten and SEC more automatic bids. But I think that's why this is happening right now, is that the playoff committee just doesn't want to lose, obviously, the 2 biggest conferences in the sport. Because that would be a death blow, honestly, to the college football playoff. So, yeah, I think that is the reason why we're hearing about an expanded playoff right now, is because the Big Ten and SEC want to get more automatic bids.
Well, Max, appreciate all of your hard work. I know you do a great job over there. I love listening to your podcast. I should say multiple. But keep up the great work, and we'll have you back on here on Locked On Cougars soon, hopefully.
Of course, man. Thank you, Jake. I really appreciate your time, man.